all in this glorious day, the 20th of January 2026, here in Santa Cruz. So we now have 40 days left. In 340. 300, no, we have 345 days left in the year 2026. Once again, welcome to At the Table with Crucian Educator. This is yours truly, Verdell Peterson. I'm the host of this 1 hour radio talk show and the #1 radio station in the Caribbean, WSTX. You're listening on your radio dial to 970 AM, and perhaps you are streaming the show live on Facebook. The show is recorded, so you are welcome to call in or to put your input on the Facebook page for WSTX 970 or on my Facebook page if you do not wish to call in. But certainly you're welcome to call in. This is a talk show, a call-in show. Sometimes I have guests, but today the guest that I have scheduled is unable to come in and possibly may call in. So I am going today to focus on the voting process and the election system of the Virgin Islands of the United States, since we have an upcoming general election this year in November. And I anticipate that we'll have a record-breaking number of candidates on the ballots, as well as there will be 5 contests or races on the ballots. Now, there's a question of whether there will be a single ballot or 2 ballots. That needs clarification. So we need to focus on the election system and to ensure that we have a safe and free and fair elections, that there's no doubt in anybody's minds of the effectiveness of what laws we have in place. Is there a need to change any law? Well, as you know, I like to focus on certain topics, and certain topics I avoid. For example, these are 5 topics that I usually avoid. Political ideologies. Everybody's entitled to their views. However, I prefer to focus on the process itself and not how people feel and think and how they opine on certain issues. The process or the law is what my preference is. So I avoid discussion on political ideologies, religion, mythology, conspiracy theories, and sports. Not that sport is a bad thing, not that those topics are not bad, but I like to give attention, preference to these topics: the Revised Organic Act, the Virgin Islands Code, governance, self-determination, constitutional development, civic education, Virgin Islands history and culture. It needs to be clear in the minds of the voters when they go to the poll what election rights they have and what method of voting is going to be used. So today's show is a special show to focus on that particular topic, highlighting the election laws and what method of voting should we anticipate this coming election? I have done some research, and according to my research, most election jurisdictions under the US flag have used exclusively counting of ballots or counting of the votes electronically, most of them. Now, there are a few places under the US flag that will use hand counting or manual counting of ballots. But I do not know of any place, any election jurisdiction that simultaneously use both methods at the polls. In other words, it's already in place whether it's going to be the ballots by law for a particular jurisdiction, whether it's going to be counted manually primarily or counted electronically primarily by tabulators or any form of counting devices. If you're interested in this topic, you're certainly welcome to call in. So let me give you the call-in numbers. The numbers are 340-773-0390 and 340-773-0490. So it's 0390 or 0490, the area code 340-773. And so I have a discussion today pertaining to a bill that is going to be addressed on Friday, January 23rd. This bill has been proposed by Senator Frankie Johnson. My understanding, and if I say anything that's incorrect, please feel free. I welcome edification, education, and correction. My understanding is that this bill will be giving voters, when they go to the poll, a choice to place their ballots into the tabulators or to not place the ballot in the tabulators and instead place ballots into a wooden box. According to my research, that doesn't happen any place under the US flag. It's either the votes are going to be primarily counted electronically or primarily counted manually. There are a few places, particularly in the New England region of America, in which it's exclusively counting manually. But those are small voting districts, usually less than 1,000 ballots to count votes from. And these places, these states include Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont. But that's particular jurisdiction, not the entire state. In those states, most of the election jurisdiction, there's only one method of counting ballots, and that is electronically. And if any information that I give to you, you can prove to be inaccurate, please feel free to call in I don't think I'm going to have my guests coming in today. So I have 3 questions that I'm putting on the table for discussion that I'm going to make up now. Do you support, number 1, do you support, I think I have a, let me see. Pleasant good morning.
Pleasant good morning to you. I need to ask a question if I may. What is this situation? What do you think of the situation with regard to hospitals, non-hospitals in the Virgin Islands, no supply, not this, not that? What do you think of it?
What I think about the situation of the hospitals not providing supplies.
I mean, they're named hospitals, but they don't have any supplies. The short staff that they have are killing themselves. I mean, what is more emphasis and attention being placed on medical facilities in the Virgin?
Well, I think it's a priority to have a fully staffed hospital and have all the resources available. So if that is taking place, that needs to be addressed.
Well, I mean, everybody knows it's taking place. Like, you're not aware of it.
You're telling me exactly what? Could you give me the precise some details? I said if it's taking place.
Yeah.
I am saying it's a priority. It should be addressed. So I don't see any problem with it being addressed.
The world knows it's a priority.
Okay, all right. It's a priority. I agree it's a priority.
Okay, but the thing is, it is not happening. And I'm surprised that you are not aware that it's not happening.
I'm not saying it's not happening. I'm saying it needs to be addressed if it's happening.
But who addressed it? The same governor you said, the best governor?
I never said that. I never said the governor is the best governor. But if you have any, listen, excuse me, I am conducting this show. And what is for discussion is pertaining to the election process. We're not talking about the hospital situation. That's not the topic for discussion today, okay? Okay, well, let me tell you, maybe you weren't listening from before. All right, well, I'm highlighting the Virgin Islands election system, and we have a Senate hearing this Friday, January 23rd, to address some issues with the voting process. Okay? There's a proposal. Excuse me. There is a proposal. Please be enlightened. There's a proposal. Okay, all right. But could you please listen? Please listen. There is a proposal by Senate. Okay, well, you're aware of it. And I am discussing today that the Board of Elections on Thursday last week at a special meeting, a motion that was put on the floor by Attorney Michael Joseph was passed. And the motion was for the Board of Elections to reject the proposal by Senator Frankie Johnson, to not support it, and for the board. Okay, well, my question today is, 1, do you support the proposal or the bill by Frankie Johnson? Yes or no? And what's your justification for your response?
I support it fully as a former board member of a term
Excuse, I'm sorry, I can't accept that kind of hostility and profanity. Goodbye. Have a nice day. And you see, we need to have civility. And that was lacking on that meeting on Thursday, where the Board of Elections, they passed a motion. The vote was 7 to reject the proposal to go back, using the caller's word, go back. Go back means to regress, to go back to the days when there was no tabulators. Tabulators prevent spoiled ballots. There was a time when there was an issue when there was the symbol for the Democratic Party and the ballots, and there were a whole bunch of spoiled ballots in 2012 and 2014. There were challenges by 2 candidates, the former governor, Kenneth Mapp, former senator, Denel Saru, because of the problem with counting the votes that spoiled and an issue of voters' intent. Well, this time, the matter has been clarified. There is no symbol voting anymore. There was no issue in 2024 pertaining to spoiled ballots because the tabulators, the current counting of votes device machines that we have, prevent ballots from being spoiled. So the question I have is, do you want to regress or go back to that method of voting and a paper ballot, and instead of inserting the ballot into a tabulator and having it scanned and the votes be counted electronically, you want to go back or regress to counting paper ballots manually. So instead of putting the ballots, paper ballots in the tabulator, you prefer to insert the paper ballots into a wooden box. That's the question I have. And if you're going to call to insult the host, I will not tolerate disrespect. Okay? That's what we're discussing. If you have an issue with the governor, address the governor. I am not the spokesperson for the governor. I am not the chief of staff for the governor. I am discussing today the issue of how we vote, the counting of the votes, and the need for clarification of Act 8690. That's what I am discussing today. So the first question, do you support going back or regressing and putting the paper ballot into a wooden box? Second question, the issue of choice. I know the proponents of this bill by Frankie Johnson. And for those of you who are not familiar with the bill, as I said, you have an opportunity to show up in the legislature building on Friday, January 23rd, where the matter will be discussed. So familiarize yourself, get to know what is this bill, about. As I said, my understanding is not only to insert your paper ballots get a choice of inserting your paper ballot into the machine or into a box. So that brings, and not only that, besides the choice, those that insert the paper ballots into the wooden box, part of the bill involves waiting until the close of election for those ballots to be counted manually. Okay? And it doesn't say exactly how manually, to my knowledge, but I don't know everything. So if anybody knows exactly how should or would the ballots be counted manually, the various methods of tallying the votes, the various methods. So the question is this: how should votes be tallied if the ballots are placed in a wooden box? Because you may have, it depends, how are you going to do it? You're going to be putting lines and marking off every fifth count. You see how tedious that could be? How long that will take? So the question is this: how should the ballots be tallied if the proposal becomes legislation? I would like to hear your input. I researched the different methods of counting ballots manually, the different methods. All right, so you tell me, what's your thought on that? And the third question that I have is it clear what are the functions of the board of elections, and what are the functions of the supervisor of elections, or is there discrepancy, conflict, and overlap of the role and responsibilities of these two entities? Okay, so you have the Office of the Supervisor of Elections, and you have elected members of the board. There are 14 elected members of the board. And the supervisor of election is hired by the board. The supervisor of election hires her staff members. As I said, any issue, any need for corrections, I don't have a problem. It is apparent that there's confusion and divisiveness on the Board of Elections. The supervisor of elections, according to what's in Act 8690, has the sole authority to certify candidates and place them on the ballot. It's clear, it's crystal clear. I don't see any misinterpretation of that. Misunderstanding. The language is explicit in Act 8690. Apparently, it's not explicit to our members of the Board of Elections, because out of their own mouths, some Board of Election members are saying that there is overlap between the function of the supervisor of elections and the Board of Elections. But that one particular part is crystal clear to me. How do you expect elected members to be the same body that determine the eligibility of candidates and whether they should be placed on the ballots or not? How do you do that when they themselves are members of a board that is elected? That's asking yourself, am I eligible for this office, for this position? And do I have the authority to place myself on the ballot? I do not see any confusion there. That part is crystal clear to me. But apparently the other parts that some board members claim there's an overlap. They don't know what the function of the Board of Elections are. They don't know what they're supposed to do on the day of elections, before elections, after elections. They don't know. They wish for clarity. I wish for clarity too for them and their behalf, because it's clear to me. I'm not confused about what is the function, the role and responsibilities of the office of the supervisor of elections. Based on the information that I gleaned at last week meeting on Thursday, the supervisor of election and her team manage the election. Okay? They make sure the election goes smoothly. However, the Board of Elections oversee the election. So if there is a challenge, a dispute, the first place of contact to resolve that matter is not the court. You could file a claim on the Board of Elections. They address grievances, okay, concerning the election. That's the function of the Board of Elections. Not to manage the elections. But everybody's entitled to an opinion, a thought, idea, speculation, imagination, theory, views, perspective, and even delusion. but you're not entitled to your own facts. Again, the supervisor of elections and her deputy supervisor and staff manage the elections. And the board of elections oversee the elections. Maybe it's not clear to you, it's clear to me, so I'm interested in your thoughts. Just a thought. Facts can be verified, and you're entitled to your opinion. But it's written, it's on paper, the law is in place. It tells you in Act 8690 what the supervisor of election is supposed to do. Okay? It's clear to me. So again, the question is it clear to you? And where do you see any discrepancy? Where you see any conflict in between the function of the board of elections and the supervisor of elections? The supervisor of election does not hear grievances. In the last election, there was a debacle. You had a voter that had a total meltdown, demanded, disturbed the peace by this demand for a wooden box to place her paper ballot into, and refusing to use the system that was established as already in place, tabulators established by law. Well, there was a form prepared for anyone who at that time in 2024 refused to put the paper ballots into the tabulators. And the meeting that was held on Thursday, there was a discussion whether the supervisor of elections had the authority to prepare such a form that essentially waive your right to insert the ballots, your paper ballot, into the tabulator. So there's a dispute about that authority of the supervisor of elections and her managing team. There's a dispute between the supervisor of elections function and the function of the board of elections. Therefore, I see a definite need for such issues to be ironed out for clarity by the legislature, because the supervisor of elections do not enact laws. The Virgin Islands legislature is a law-making body. It's a unicameral body. They take votes. Just like the Board of Elections is a unicameral body. One. It's a joint board. It's only one board. All of that has been clarified through law, amendments to previous law. Previously, there were two boards. There was the St. Croix board and the St. Thomas St. John board. That created a lot of confusion. Therefore, you had Senator Kenneth Gittens pass election laws that involve clarification so that those issues won't reoccur. There's one board, there's a joint board. There are 14 members to the board. As I said, some members do not know they function. They have written letters to the AG, the Attorney General. However, the Attorney General have not responded to those letters. So I guess the next step then, take the matter to the legislature, since they're the one passed the legislations, right? But interestingly, at that meeting, a motion by member Francis to have the legislature review Act 8690 was voted against by 5 members of the Board of Elections. The same ones that are confused. They're confused about their function, but do not wish for the senators to review Act 8690. That's puzzling to me. If something is confusing you and you don't know what's your function, why not ask the senators to review the legislation or the amendment to the laws? Because obviously the AG is ignoring their request. I don't know why the AG hasn't responded. So that's the best way of dealing with the situation. Take the matter to the legislature and have them review. And if the legislature reviews and see no issue, then we just need the members to understand, here, this is the law. This is how it is. Do you need to take a literacy course? If you still don't think that is the right interpretation, and your interpretation is correct, you have a legal dispute. Take the matter to court. The AG cannot solve all your problems. That's not the role and function of the AG. There's a third branch of government. It's called the judiciary branch. When there's a dispute in the interpretation of the law, you take the matter to court and a judge will decide. Okay? The judge makes a legal interpretation, not an opinion like the AG. The AG could opine, yes, which is what happened in the in last year, 2024. The AG opined that a candidate who was disqualified by the supervisor of election should be placed on the ballot in defiance of the authority of the supervisor of elections. By law, in Act 8690. The supervisor of elections has the sole authority to certify candidates and place the candidates on the ballots. That is not the authority of the Board of Elections. So the motion that was passed to place this disqualified candidate on the ballot was erroneous. It was a defiance of the authority of the supervisor of elections. It was a violation of the law. However, the supervisor of elections, because of technical issues, could not file a lawsuit to prevent that. But now we have an upcoming election. It needs to be clear in all the minds of the board members that they don't have that authority. They do not certify candidates and place them on the ballots. That's the function of the supervisor of elections. It is clear in the law. But if they don't understand that, go to the legislature, have their testimonies be read on the record from all 14 members, although 2 were absent at the last Board of Election meetings. I am assuming those 2 members that were absent could still put their written testimonies on the record as far as the operation of the Board of Elections. If they want to put on the record, they have the authority in defiance of the law. I guess they have the right to. They have a right to their opinions. But they don't have the right to violate laws. So if it happens again, I would hope the supervisor of elections simply followed the law. Disqualify a candidate, do not put the candidate on the ballot, period. Now, if the board members want to take her to court for following the law, for exercising her authority, I guess they can do so. But the law is crystal clear. So I would hope the meeting in the legislature, the hearing rather, resolve all these issues and that we have a smooth upcoming election, because I anticipate that you are going to have a record number of candidates on the ballots. There are going to be 5 races or 5 contests. You have the gubernatorial race, the senatorial race, the race for delegate to Congress, Board of Elections, and Board of Education. I don't believe, this is just my belief, my thought, that you're going to have a record-breaking number of candidates seeking office on the Board of Elections and the Board of Education. I could be wrong. My thought, though, is the more the merrier, because you, the voters, are the ones that ultimately will decide by majority votes who will be the next governor, who will be the next 15 senators in the legislature, in the 37th legislature, who will be the delegate to Congress, who will be the members on the Board of Education and the members on the Board of Elections. That's a democracy. That's what you know, like what is known as representative democracy. Whoever gets the most vote for governor becomes the governor, period. In some cases, there might be a runoff. If it doesn't happen in the first shot, you mean if one candidate doesn't get 50% plus one of the votes, then you need to have a runoff. The same thing for delegate to Congress. There could be a runoff. And the likelihood of a runoff increases the more candidates you have. And I predict you're going to have many. I don't know if anybody saw the unofficial list. But according to the unofficial list, there are 10 gubernatorial teams we could anticipate. Most likely, there will be a runoff. And definitely, there will be a primary election. So shouldn't the voters know clearly what to anticipate when they go to the polls? Imagine the confusion when voters go to the poll and they see a wooden box and they see the tabulators and they said, you have a choice. You can choose to put your votes into a wooden box, which is going backwards, or a tabulator, which is going forward, progression in this 21st century digital age. That's the trend. Most election jurisdictions under US flag have opted to primarily count ballots electronically. Very few places count ballots manually. Now, the issue of choice. We already have choice. When you go to the poll, based on the existing laws now, you have a choice whether to mark on your ballots directly. That means you receive a paper ballot. You get up, when you sign in, you have to sign in. You get a paper ballot. Each voter comes to a poll, you sign in. You get a paper ballot, if you so choose. Or if you do not wish to mark on a paper ballot, for example, and by law, by federal law, you must have the touchscreen machine available for those who are visually impaired or disabled. You need to have the machine. You cannot give a blind person a paper ballot because they cannot see. In some case, the person may be able to see, but they have motor coordination. They have a problem with holding a pencil and marking. So it would be easier for the person to use the touch screen machine. Okay? So by law, by federal law, that machine has to be available. So you do have a choice. Even if you're not visually impaired or have motor coordination issues, you can choose to use the touch screen machine, or you can choose to use the paper ballot. So the proponents of Frankie Johnson's bill is misleading people. They're misleading the voters because you do have choice. You do have a choice. Your rights, civil rights, are not being violated or infringed upon. There is no pressure to use either method, either way. But there is only one way of counting the ballots based on the existing law, and that's electronically. That's a law. It's already passed. If it was not a law, then why would the proponents be asking for the law to be amended so that voters could decide when they go to the poll whether to have their ballots counted manually or electronically? There is no such choice under the US flag in any jurisdiction. It's either your ballots are going to, if you go to a particular jurisdiction, it's either the ballots are going to be counted electronically or counted manually. So imagine now the supervisor of elections, along with the input from the board members, prepares a budget for the elections. At the last meeting, the supervisor of election mentioned that the budget is insufficient. How would they be able to estimate accurately how many persons will be employed to count ballots? How would they know that? Because it's more expensive when ballots are counted manually. So they would not know until the day of election, because there isn't any way you can tell if a person is going to choose, should the law be amended. There is no advance notification of what the voter choice would be. Let's say at a particular polling site or center, you already have 5 persons employed to count ballots, but nobody chooses to put their ballot into a wooden box. That could happen. Or there's a possibility that everybody chooses, should the law be amended, to put their ballots into a wooden box. How much it's going to cost? How could we know in advance the cost? Because we don't know in advance how many people will choose to use a wooden box to insert their ballots. So it is not feasible to have such a choice. It's a conflict. It's a conflict, and furthermore, the motion that was placed on the floor by Attorney Michael Joseph to reject the bill that involved choice between manual counting and electronic counting was passed fair and square. 7 members voted to reject the proposal by Frankie Johnson. Respect the will of the majority. Yes, this dissenting voices should have their opinions on the record. I agree with that. But the fact is, the motion was passed, and a unified body voted to reject that issue of choice. And in my opinion, that was a wise decision, because I see this comes down to a choice. Do you want to use common sense and wisdom, or you prefer to resort to ignorance and defiance? I hope common sense and wisdom prevail, and we keep the system that's in place, and our board members be on the same page and understand what their role and responsibilities are, and we have a smooth and fair election. I would not say it was 100% smooth last year, because you had a disturbance. You had defiance. You had voters that do not respect the laws, the election laws, and want to have things their way. Okay. But the fact as it is now, the law that exists now, all ballots are counted electronically. The ballots are scanned, and you get a count of the votes electronically. That's the way it's done. There's no choice. There's no choice, no place under the US flag in any election jurisdiction. And that's a fact that can be verified. So we want to be the laughing stock to the rest of the nation. When we have advanced to this point, we had the subtronic machines before that. Before the subtronic machine, which is not absolute, it's not part of that. We're using tabulators, the touch screen. Before that, you have paper ballots. You had a lot of spoiled ballots in the year 2012. That was spoiled ballots. Okay? In 2014, the tabulators were introduced. The tabulators were a project, a former board member, Adelbert Bryan. He's the one that introduced tabulators, because the tabulators, you leave a digital footprint. If the numbers don't match, there's a problem. Just like with the case of O.J. Simpson, if the glove doesn't fit, I quit. The glove fits. Numbers have to be matched up. The number of persons that sign in when they go to the election polls and sign out should be the same number of ballots that are counted by the tabulators. Okay? And then there's a audit, a random audit. It's only then you involve manual counting. When you have the when you do the audit, which are random, after the election, the numbers must match. If the glove fits, leave the system as it is. It's not broken. There's no need to fix it. We already have something in place that's effective. We just need to have board members understand their role and responsibilities. That's what we need clarification on, and that's what I hope we'll get. And anybody wish to have any inquiries, because I don't speak on behalf of the board of elections or the supervisor of elections. I am just another civic-minded citizen, a community activist that want to see the process run smoothly. But if you have any concerns and inquiries, contact vivote.gov. That's the website for the election system. Or contact the supervisor of elections office. Get your clarification. And I urge everyone interested in this issue, attend the hearing January 23rd, this Friday. Get the clarification, see, know your election rights, know the process, know exactly what's supposed to happen when you go to the poll in November of this year. There are demonstrations of the machines. Knowledge is power. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your attention to this matter. And let's resolve things amicably. Live, listen, learn, love, and levitate.